Welcome to the Spirit-Centered Business Podcast, where we blend the spiritual with the practical for supernatural results. Now, here is your host, Bralynn Newby.
Hello there. Welcome back to Spirit-Centered Business. And I have Jon George with me. We're going to listen to stories from the barn today. I'm really excited to hear those. And I may have heard a couple that he's dropped, or else somebody has told me. So it's going to be really good. So before we get to those, though, you guys, make sure that you do take that business assessment. It's free over on spiritcenteredbusiness.com. Check out the store if you've already done it. There's also the Gates Checkup Challenge to go through 5 of the most critical gates in your business, financial and relationships and integrity and opportunities and things like that. So that's a free challenge over on spiritcenteredbusiness.com. Go to the store and you can find it there. All right, Jon. Oh my gosh. Part 1 was so cool. And you guys make sure that you do go catch part 1 if you missed it, because he has an amazing story, and we covered a lot of bases as far as his walk, his spiritual walk, and his business walk, and his family stuff, and all of that. So make sure that you check out number 1 if you haven't already. All right, Jon, I'm giving you the stage for stories from the barn.
Awesome. And I'm having to shift locations because of background noise, but I'm going to find a good spot here.
All right. Well, it sounds like my neighbor's dog that I'm dog sitting is growling at squirrels out the window. So hopefully she won't be too loud.
Oh, no problem.
Oh, that's okay. Dogs happen, right?
Oh, I'm so excited to be here with you. And I have a quick story to tell on you. I think I've told you this story before when we met with Terry Spencer. But I just was so blessed one time because I really have, you'd asked me the question in the last session, how was my transition into the kingdom age and how we do business or how our faith has been and how we practice. And so it's been really amazing. God really used you as a host on Kingdom Talks. And of course, Gil and everyone over there to, just introduce. In fact, that's how I first knew about Chris Carter and so many other guests you had on the show. And so I was listening to another one of your podcasts one time, and you had been talking about the practice of going in, asking the Father for gold from heaven, and then actually going and prayer, and then applying that almost as a physical covering of gold over technology to have it work better, like on a Zoom call or other things, or on business transactions. Father, will you cover this with gold? We cover this with gold. And I just was intrigued. And I think that one of the thoughts I've always had, similar to in the last segment when I was saying, everybody, if you could do that, even in landscape architecture and design, if you could do that, I could study that, and I think I could absorb that superpower. So I was listening to you, and I was like, let's try that. I think let's see what happens. And so this was very memorable because it was during COVID, and this was during a time, it was a very potentially scary time for those of us small business owners, because we had clients canceling left and right because because they didn't want us outside in their yards. It took a moment to figure out that we were going to be a deemed business that could be allowed to keep going, because we mostly worked outside during that scare time. But it also was interesting because people were just afraid to meet with us. They were afraid to make the personal contact, even to make the appointment to come in and see their designs on the computer, because they were so afraid they would contract the disease. So we had, contracts pulling out, we had clients pulling out left and right or threatening to. And I was like, oh, Father, how is this going to happen? What are we going to do? How are we going to keep running? And he reminded me of something, and I'm going to get to covered with gold in just a moment. But he reminded me there was a period of time when, and this was 5 years ago, when things really shifted for us in the spirit. And there was a provision of God that began happening where we began to see not just we were talking about signs and wonders or talking about the kingdom, but I began to pray. And he's a well-known songwriter and hip hop artist, Brandon Burke, and he's become a dear friend. So he and I would pray, and I know now it's called ascending, but we were like, we're just going to go up the mountain, and we're going to be with God, and we're going to see what he wants us to participate with and how he wants us to pray. It was like a top-down version of prayer that I know now is a whole nother way of approaching things. It's not that I'm down here wondering if my prayers are getting through. Now we can go actually sit with Jesus or sit with anyone that he wants to have us meet in the heavens, and we can now participate with them. So during this time, we were having a lot of gold dust manifest, and people getting healed. I had a woman with stage 4 cancer healed that year, and then we began to watch these videos about gemstones falling. And my son, who was about 10 years old at the time, he was like, "Daddy," he goes like, "I want a gemstone from heaven." And I was like, "Okay." And he said, "I want a diamond." He was very specific in his request. "I want a diamond." So I said, "Well, I can't give you a diamond, but I said, I know if you ask Father, I know if you ask him, he very well may give you a diamond. Why don't you ask him?" And so we were in a intercessory, it was like a prophetic intercessory gathering, and we were listening to some great music, Alberto Rivera, and just just high frequency, just high worship, just wonderful. And all of a sudden he sees this thing drop next to his chair, and he reaches underneath and pulls it up, and lo and behold, it is a stone that looks very much like an uncut diamond. And he said, "Look, Daddy, my diamond, my diamond, my diamond." And I was like, "Did you pick that up in the parking lot? Is that like some parking lot gravel that you threw in here as a joke, prank Daddy?" And he was like, "I promise you, yeah, there was nothing like it in the building." I'm like, "This looks like it's either a piece of quartz or it is an uncut diamond." But we knew it was from heaven, because then, of course, gold dust manifested all over our hands.
Wow.
And it began to change shape and size. As we brought it home, it began to grow larger. And as we rinsed it off, it became the inside became clear. And even though it didn't have facets like a cut diamond would, we could see it. It had a fire inside. And so we went home all excited, put it under the microscope. And sure enough, it was throwing these amazing bits of rainbow fire just all over the place.
Oh my God.
As the light refracted through it. And I can tell you this, just looking at some of those photos that I took with my cell phone down into the microscope lens is enough to bring me to another place with God, with Father.
Oh, that's amazing, Jon. Wow.
So during this COVID time, when I was like, the clients are pulling out, and how are we going to meet payroll, and what is going to happen? And Father spoke to me. There was a lot of anguish. I can't say that it was a pretty time. I had a lot of people praying. There was a lot of walking the fields here on our farm and praying. And so then he just nudged me and he said, "If I could, your son asked for a diamond, if I could drop a stone down from heaven," and we haven't taken it in to have it appraised because it's his diamond from the Lord, from Father. So that's his. And at some point, if he wants to get it appraised, he can. But we know it has eternal value because it's from heaven. So, so Father, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, have you ever talked to anybody who has had their gemstones from heaven appraised?
No. Have you?
Yeah. And from what I've heard is the appraisers don't know what to do with it because there's nothing that is like it. And so they can't verify like the chemical compound or whatever the compound of the thing. It's something that's not
is not known
of. Yeah, exactly. So they can't.
Wow.
Yeah, praise it.
Awesome. That could be part 3 once we figure that out.
Yeah, right.
But Father was nudging me, and he was like, well, if I could drop a stone down, a diamond down for your son, wouldn't you believe that I could drop anything of any value down for you in your time of need, and
Wow.
it would be yours, and it would help you get through. And it just took me back to this very childlike faith of like, wow, I really do have to become like a child to enter the kingdom, because, like, as we know, those of us in business, all the pushing and pulling and chanting and ranting and begging and making promises to God, none of that works. you know it's just like, that I do know. I mean, the more I'm on my seat of rest, the more he does provide. And I have to say that that was a big, that fear of not having provision was a big obstacle to overcome from my childhood. My own
Mm.
father was an entrepreneur, and so there were times when we were feasting, and then there were times when we didn't have groceries. And I remember my grandmother bringing bags of groceries over and
Mm.
feeding our family. So I grew up under this kind of fearful auspice of, are we going to make it? Are you sure we're going to have enough? And what do we have to do? What do we have to perform to get this? Not that hard work is not involved. Again, one of my principles is whatever it takes. So
Mhm.
if I have to get in there and finish and shovel and finish the last plant, I will, whatever it takes. So I'm not allergic to work. It's just that I'm realizing more. So Father's saying, well, this is how you're going to rule and reign. It's going to be on a seat of rest and not a seat of striving. So that brings me to the story. So you were challenging the listeners, us listeners, to, like, what if you covered everything with gold? So there was a transaction with we were doing a design with a couple, and it was a very large project, and it was a very cool garden concept. They had lived or had worked in Ireland. I'm sorry, not Ireland, Scotland. And
Mhm.
they love Scotland. In fact, they wanted to move to Scotland, except their business is based here in Florida. So they have to stay here. And
Mm.
so they were like, could you create a garden that resembles Scotland, that takes us to Scotland every time we go into it?
Mm.
And so what we did was we found an old Scottish church design where they had this parterre, which is like a different segmented garden that you walk through. So it's kind of like a Celtic cross in the center with a fountain in the center. And then it has 4 to 6 different segments that come out of it. They're all geometrically shaped. And
Mm.
so what we did was we created that and transposed that design into their backyard, and then had the fountain, have the gravel paths, the boxwood edging, the colorful flowers, small blooming trees. The whole thing was magical. And
Wow.
so, but we created this all in 3D space on our computer graphics, and it had a very large budget. And so I wasn't sure, and it was COVID, and I wasn't sure if they were going to go for it. And I even heard that they own their own company. And because of layoffs that they were doing, they decided, well, we're going to just live off of our savings. And this couple said, they were believers. They said, we're going to pay our staff for a year and see what happens, but we are not going to take any salary. We're just going to live off our savings. And yet they were coming in to see a beautiful garden design based on a Scottish garden. So
Yeah.
before this transaction, before this presentation, before they came in, I was listening to you. And so here's the extended version of this. And so I just began to cover everything with gold. So
Mm.
then we live on one side of the property. So I drove over to the other side of the 15 acres, the old remodeled horse barn we have there as our studio. And so we have these wood, luxury vinyl plank floors. They look like old barn wood. And so what we do is we always stage a presentation before someone comes in. So we bring in blooming plants and flowers that might be in their design to show them the real thing as well as the digital. And then we also will just sweep up, because our gardeners are always tracking mud through the barn floors. So I was a designated sweeper. And as I had my little broom and dustpan, I realized that there was all this sparkly gold. I mean, very large gold pieces that were sparkling just all over the floor. And I was like, huh. And so as I swept them up, they were actually so tangible that they were sweeping into the dustbin. into the dustpan. And I was like, huh. And then I would sweep some and then more would appear. And then I would sweep some and more would appear. And through every room in the barn and even into the presentation room that we have, they just kept appearing, and I just kept sweeping and sweeping. And so like I had this whole dustbin full of sparkles, full of gold sparkles. And what we found here is that some sparkles dissipate and they kind of produce an oil on our fingers. And some are like little mini gemstones that dissipate into oil, or little sparkles if we take close-up pictures of them. And then others, they hang around, and they can hang around for days or months, but then they can appear and not appear. So it's a heaven substance, because you can't actually pen them down, because they're appearing and not appearing. And so as I began to dump the sand from the sweep up into the bin, and all these gold sparkles came into the garbage can, I was like, this is going to be a really, really good presentation. Thank you, Bralynn, for introducing that concept. And then and then we noticed in the room where we do the presentations, it used to be the old double birthing stall that we've turned into it's our creative lab, but then we do the presentations in that same spot. So it's a creative space. Horses were birthed there once, and now garden landscape and designs are birthed there.
Yeah.
So right embedded in the wall was also a very sparkly little gemstone in this little knot in the wall, and it just refused to go away.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, God's really doing something here. Father's really moving, and okay, let's see what happens. So what happened was the couple came in for the presentation. They loved it. And they said, actually, we want to do this, and we've decided actually to do all of it, and we want to add more. And then he turned to me, because we were all rejoiced and excited. He's like, we're living off of our savings right now. But he goes, I don't know why, but God wants us to invest in you all and have you do this anyway. And so we were like, yes, this is going to be a good seed sown. We're going to pray for your business. And even as we went to work on his property, he was giving us money, because another one of the gentlemen, his wife had lost her job from COVID. And so he gave us money to give that family. And so it was just all this generosity poured out. And he was like, I wasn't sure, because they didn't have any guaranteed income themselves. But he went smiling, that business owner went smiling, and he said, after we finished that garden and we did the walkthrough, and he said, John, he was like, before we had nothing, we were not paying ourselves. He said, and then unexpectedly, we had a large government contract come through for $7 million. And he goes, we're off to the races again. And we were like, wow, when heaven participates, like, is there any, room for like what I can and cannot do with my own limitations?
But excuse me, the principle though, not only did you just trust the Lord to provide, but you did the work. Like, you did the design and you figured it out. You did the research about what a Scottish garden looked like, and you hadn't been paid for all of that, right?
Right. That was all spec work.
Right, exactly. So you did the work, just believing that the Lord would work it out, and then you prayed to cover it in gold, and then he did, and even more. So, oh my gosh, he's so good, isn't he, John? Oh,
yes, he is. And I just love how he links us together, and he gives one person a key, and then another person, we could take that and say, what do you, Father, what do you want to do with this? In my situation, because he's not giving us gold in every situation, but it certainly was a profound time where that's what he was doing, and we were just like so in awe of how he was doing it.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool. Yeah, God.
So here's another story from the barn. We've had several people. So we have two groups that meet here during the week. One is an ongoing prophetic prayer time where people come, and it's just a static worship, and sometimes hours of worship, and sometimes it's a little teaching here or there. But and it seems to be growing. I think that right now, Holy Spirit really wants to show off. in this age. I can definitely tell the door hinge is swinging open
Mm.
because it's right now, it's easier for people to see, hear, and experience what God's doing more than ever before. I really believe we're coming more into that season. So it's exciting because sometimes we'll have, dramatic healings, and then sometimes we see people go to heaven. There are no guarantees except that we're just figuring out what heaven is doing and what Father, Son, and Spirit want us to cooperate with. So one of these stories was that at the beginning of the year, we had a client. She's a very learned doctor here in town, and she's retired because turns out that she had leukemia, that she had cancer, and she was battling cancer. And so she had been burned by a lot of contractors. So this goes back to the business aspect of things. We realized that in our business, part of what we're doing is mending fences, building bridges, and bridges of trust. Because if people don't trust us, they're not going to use us, or they're not going to recommend us.
Right.
So we're actually a healing balm, a healing salve for all those other, interchanges, exchanges, business transactions. That's the word I was looking for. All the other transactions where they were shafted, we're actually saying, well, you don't know yet that we're going to be Jesus to you, but you're going to find out.
Beautiful.
So this person had been so burned by contractors, and she even took us through her house and told us how the building contractors had not done the ventilation system correct, and they had to rip out all the mold in the attic, and on and on and on. I mean, every contractor that had come to her house had broken something, or ripped her off, or charged her too much, or did a job halfway, and she was fully expecting us to be like this.
Oh.
And so it took probably, where most clients take 1 or 2 or 3 interactions, this took probably 10 to 15 interactions before she came in. It would actually sign anything. But what happened is that in her very untrusting, very almost her body language was so held tight, almost like she couldn't let go of anything. And I was like, what is it going to take for her to trust us? And then we always pray about this with clients, like, is this one going to be worth the ride? Is this a ride you want us to take with this client? Or am I barking up the wrong tree and need to go somewhere else?
Right.
Because it was, so many questions. So finally, during one of our little prayer sessions at the barn, worship times, I was taken into kind of this place in the heavens to look at our company calendar for the year. And Father said, look at every one who's booked in to the calendar from January to the present. This was like in March, maybe. And he was like, and he showed me a picture of this doctor who was so frightened and so reluctant to sign. And he said, I want you to look at something that almost all of them have in common. And I looked, and the thing that they all had in common was that they were dealing with cancer. They either had dealt with it, they were currently dealing with it, or they had a family member or a pet that was dying from it. So everybody was entrenched in dealing with cancer. And he began to speak to me. He said, this is the trauma that she's holding on to, and almost every client. So we call our business a business tree. So it's a combination of a business and ministry. And like in the last session, I was always waiting for the chance to jump into ministry. And then Father says, your green thumb is the ministry.
Yeah.
So
good. So good, John.
But so I began to have this different view of her. Like, he was like, I don't care how many sessions it takes with this doctor. I want you to meet with her and to win her over and to minister to that root of fear, because she feels like she's going to die. Because when it came to discussing, we finally got to a place we're going to discuss a down payment. And she was like, oh no, we cannot put any money down. I was like, well, this is normal in business to seal a contract. We have to have a down payment. We have to secure the materials. Right. And she was like, well, don't you all grow a lot of the things on your farm? I'm like, yes, but it's not for free. We have to pay our people and buy the plants in, and and so she was like, she just totally came from a medical mindset that she did not understand a down payment. And her husband was very burned and did not want to put any money down either. And so I was praying about this, and Father said, work with her and do whatever it takes to win her over and gain her trust. Because the fear of this is her dying. Because she asked me a strange question. She said, John, she goes, if I give you this large down payment, what happens if you die before this project is finished? And I
Oh
was
my
like, I've
gosh.
never had a client ask me, what if I die? I said, well, God forbid, but I said, my estate would have to settle up with you. And I'm sure if we weren't able to perform the services, that they would write you a check and refund your money. I can't tell you what else, to say. And then Father was like, well, that's not really the question she was asking. She was not asking, John, if you were going to die. She was projecting and saying, what if I die? Because she was very sick. What if I
Yeah.
die before this transaction is completed? What will happen? And so he said, you minister to that. You minister to her fear of death and
Hmm.
dying, and you ask me to cause this garden to bring such life to her that she wants to keep on living. And as
Hmm.
we realize the frequency of different flowers, and that's another 10 stories that Father's helped us understand how each flower has its own frequency and how they're playing
Hmm.
in a symphony of healing or whatever Father wants to show off in that person's yard. So, for example, one of our key flowers that we plant here is a tulip ginger called Freedom. So now it's a running joke in our staff. Well, this person's getting more freedom and that person's getting more freedom. It's like, where do you want freedom planted? Because it's not just plants. Plants are always, and it's not just the ground. Plants and the ground are always attached to people. So what I didn't realize was getting into this business tree of working with plants, it's not really about the plants, even though they're awesome. It's really about the people. And so
Yeah.
whether I would be paid staff in some organization to be the guru and to minister to people directly like that and say, oh, I have a ministry, or whether I'm here in the landscape, horticultural, landscape architecture world and design world, doing what I do. But I get to be a stealth ministry person. I get to be, awesomely, like cloaked and be able to go in and say, you don't know what has landed in your yard, and you don't know what Father has planned for you, and you don't know how this is going to minister to you and change your whole perspective.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's a whole other episode or teaching even. Maybe we need to hook up and do that teaching because that's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
let me
So
finish part
finish.
two part
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
of this ministering to this doctor.
Right. Right.
So little by little, and it was interesting because we don't get a lot of prophetic words now because we're now directly talking to Jesus, and it's really awesome like that. But I still love to get prophetic words because it's an outside perspective, and then we can compare notes and like, oh, you really are saying this. Yay! It's confirmed 7 different ways or 3 different ways or however it done. So I've got, from church age, from kingdom age, however God wants to do it, we're like, let's do this. So we had a word come forward, and a gentleman said, you're about to come into some clients that are going to say, I don't care how much it costs, carte blanche, just make it beautiful and send me the bill at the end. So here, this very reluctant client, this doctor, we came to her property, we worked with her. In fact, I even said the second part of your down payment, so you'll see that we're there on site with the workers, with the plants. Don't even bother finishing your down payment to us until we're 3 days into the project. I've never done that for anybody else, unless
Wow.
Father said, do whatever it takes to win her. So we're 3 days into the project, and then we're a week into the project. And she comes out smiling to me and she says, this is changing my life. And she goes, I've never experienced anything this good. And you all have not broken anything and you have not ripped me off. And she goes, my husband and I trust you now. And she goes, I want to tell you that my husband released me. And he said, I don't care what you spend, just have them do whatever they want, make it as beautiful as they can, and send us the bill at the end.
Oh, wow.
And so by the end of this, she said, you all are family. Not only do I trust you, I need you in my life. I need you to come and advise me. I need you to come walk with me through this garden from time to time. And my other designer, Kim Pollard, KP Pollard, and I, we did a dry creek bed for her. And so we stood in the dry creek bed, and her husband had gone in the house, and we put both of our arms around her, and she was in the middle. And we said, now, we're praying people. Because she said, I'm so surprised you haven't broken anything or cut the utility lines. And I said, oh, that's because we're praying people. And we really pray over every job, and we're praying for you. And so we stood in the dry creek bed, and we gave her, the hug. She was in between us. And I said, would it be okay if we prayed for your healing? And as far as I could tell, she was agnostic. She had not acknowledged God in any way, shape, or form. And she said, yes, I would love that. And so we prayed, and God showed up. And this was all during a final walkthrough of a landscape company. And here God's sneaking in the back door through a dry creek bed and a beautiful little garden with pathways and native flowers.
Wow, that is so cool. And so God, right, Jon? Oh my gosh. Whew.
Yes.
Oh, beautiful.
So those were the stories on my heart to share.
Oh, that was so good. Thank you so much for doing that. And your internet is freezing just a little bit, but we didn't lose the words, so it was all good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's good. But I really would like to pursue, like, there's frequency, frequency healing is a thing, and it's going to be more and more, and especially as we understand what the Lord does through frequency and releasing our voice. And so when you're talking about the flowers having their own frequency, and then you put them together in a certain harmony in that symphony that you mentioned, like, oh my gosh, there's a lot there that we could definitely teach people, if you're not already. I'm like, oh, I want to get it.
And I can say there's a lot we have yet to unpack and discover and explore.
Yeah, that is exciting. Well, okay, audience, you heard it here. So if you would love to check out his designs, make sure that you go to thecottagegardener.com, thecottagegardener.com. And soon, well, in the future, I'm not pushing you to make it soon, but you'll be selling bulbs. But do you do remote consultations or designs?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. We're focused mainly in our North Central Florida area.
Sure.
But we've had requests for that, and that's, I've lived in all kinds of zones and all kinds of climates, so we could probably figure it out. It just is the time has to be expanded for what we're doing.
Right.
But yes, we have some awesome flowering plants that do produce bulbs that are unique, and we've trialed them, and we're trying to launch a website for that. But I do also invite people, if you're on Facebook, just look me up, Jon, Jon, Jon George, 2 first names. And on Facebook, I post most of my business stuff because I need help with all the Facebook stuff and syncing up and linking up the business page. We do have a Cottage Gardens business page, which is very rarely used because I'm just usually posting things on my own personal page. But please feel free to follow or like or send me a friend request. I'd be happy to share all those flower and garden photos with you.
Oh, yes. Awesome. So this has been really good. Thank you for sharing your heart and just sharing what the Lord has done, especially with the gold and may it continue. I just bless you to continue putting gold over transactions, over people, over flowers, over plants, over your business, over relationships, and over whatever you need to put gold over. And may it just attract more gold and just work the Lord's miracles in the mighty name of Jesus.
Yes. And will you teach on that again?
And will I
Will
what?
you on that covering stuff with gold? Will you teach on that covering thing with gold again? I would love that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I haven't touched that subject in a long time, but it is kind of just one of the things that I do. So I guess I could bring it back up again. Absolutely. I tend to like get the revelation, teach about it, just kind of work it into my own stuff and move on, but
Yeah.
I will.
Well, let's just see what we do with that.
Exactly. We'll see where it goes. All right, you guys, definitely share this out because people love to hear encouraging stories. So share this with your friends, and hopefully you will be able to hear everything, especially if you're just doing the podcast. It shouldn't have impacted you at all, Jon's internet there. Bear with us, and we apologize for the video, but the sound was all good. And so we heard the story, we heard the message. So go ahead and share it with your friends. All right, you guys, until next time, stay spirit-centered. Peace out.
Hey there, SCB peeps. I want to give a huge shout out and deep appreciation and thanks to Candace Benton. She has become a super sponsor for the Spirit Centered Business Show. So I would appreciate you helping me in sending blessings and abundance back to her. Thank you so much, Candace, and you are well loved.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Centered Business with Bralynn Newby. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. The next stage of doing business by being spirit-centered is coming together in collaboration, working with spiritual principles and knowing our destiny. Join our tribe at spiritcenteredbusiness.com, and we'll catch you on the next broadcast. Peace out.